All right. Good morning, everyone. It's Kent here, coming to you live from live from my neighbor's garage, of all places. Uh, Man, what a week it's been. What a month, but particularly, I don't know, just the last week has been strange, heartbreaking. There's been fear, anxiety. I felt fear and anxiety. And who would have guessed? No one would have guessed that um, this is what the first week of March would look like. And this is what America would look like for this foreseeable future. So, here at C3, we wanted to try to, as best we can, still be available and present in this kind of digital form. Um, and we made the decision, like so many other places, out of necessity and also out of a sense of obligation to listen to our leaders, um, to cancel services this week and kind of regroup. We have a board meeting just on the practical side. We have a board meeting this Wednesday, and we'll be deciding kind of what some next steps might be for us as a community. I do think personally that C3 and other kinds of communities are needed now more than ever, especially as we begin to feel an increased sense of isolation. Um, it's important to find ways to stay connected. So thanks for joining me. I don't think I've ever really used Facebook Live, at least not in any kind of at least I don't remember using it in any direct sense. And I know you can write comments, so I'll see exactly how I'll be learning kind of this format as we go along. But again, just to reiterate some things I said at the beginning, thanks for joining us this morning. Thanks for joining me in a kind of Sunday morning 10 a.m. chat instead of getting together face to face. Yeah, I wanted to, during our weekly gatherings, we always have a kind of reading. And I wanted to begin with a reading this morning. And I think my mind and heart has sort of been pulled toward some of my favorite writers and poets. There's something about poetry that tries to speak to the undercurrent of reality, the deeper sense of what it means to be human and what it means to be a community and what it means to live in this wild and obviously unpredictable world. I sometimes, I've said in the past, you've probably heard me say in the past, that, let me see if I can find where these comments are. Okay. You probably heard me say in the past that watch the news and then read a poem. And I guess I have to admit that I need to take my own advice on things, because I don't know what the last few days have been like for you, but mine have been just an absolute barrage of news and different kinds of news, and feeling like maybe I'm not watching the right news, and probably at no other time have we needed truthful and honest reporting as right now, and just feeling the anxiety of that. And so I've tried to take my own advice to watch the news and also to not watch the news, and to turn to poems and wisdom. So I wanted to start there. I see someone is reminding me not to touch my face. Okay, thanks. All right, I wanted to start off this morning by reading from a book called Consolations. It's a book by David Whyte that's actually not poetry, although it kind of reads a bit like it at times. It's actually a work of prose. And in it, he takes ordinary words that we use and writes a little essay on these individual words. I highly recommend this book. And the first word I thought of is a word near the end of this book, and the word is vulnerability. And I guess in a very obvious way, I've felt more vulnerability in the last few days than I have in a long time. So as a reading, I thought I'd let David Whyte speak first, and then I've got a little bit of a teaching put together, or at least I have some thoughts that I'd like to share this morning. So here's David Whyte's very short essay on vulnerability. He begins by saying, vulnerability is not a weakness, a passing indisposition, or something we can arrange to do without. Vulnerability is not a weakness. It is not something we can arrange to do without. Vulnerability is not a choice. Vulnerability is the underlying, ever-present, and abiding undercurrent of our natural state. Vulnerability is the ever-present and abiding undercurrent of our natural state. In other words, it is the fundamental essence of our reality. To run from vulnerability, is to run from the essence of our nature. The attempt to be invulnerable is the vain attempt to become something we are not, and most especially to close off our understanding of the grief of others. And I think what reminded me of this essay on vulnerability is my own sense of wanting to close. And in some ways, it's like the most natural initial response to uncertainty. How can I close down and protect and seal off what's invisible in a way? To seal off the unknown, to seal off the possibility of being exposed as being vulnerable to something. And in this case, to this unknown, unseen illness. But he's saying we can't run from vulnerability because it's fundamentally our own nature. So he goes on. To have a temporary, isolated sense of power over events and circumstances is a lovely, illusionary privilege. To have a temporary, isolated sense of power over all events and circumstances is a lovely, illusionary privilege. And perhaps the prime and most beautiful constructed conceit of being human, and especially of being youthfully human. And we obviously live in a time that is obsessed with youth, is obsessed with what's new. Maybe you've heard the phrase, it's maybe a Lakota phrase, no wise person ever wanted to be younger. It shows you how unwise our culture is when much of our industry is bent on remaining youthful. And if we can add that to that sense of youthfulness, this illusionary privilege of having a sense of power over events and circumstances. And there's nothing like the present moment right now in March in this era, in this age, in this part of the world, and now all over the world, that is cracking that illusion. The illusion of having power over all circumstances. It doesn't mean we have zero choice. It just means we're not as powerful and as invulnerable as our illusionary sense of self wants us to be, or thinks we are, is a better way of saying it. He goes on, but it is a privilege that must be surrendered, this illusory sense of power and privilege, and it must be surrendered with that same youth, with ill health, with accident, with loss of loved ones who share our untouchable powers. Powers eventually and most emphatically given up as we approach our last breath. Yeah, this is why we need poets, to remind us of what's true, of what's really true. And to whisper in the wind of the fundamental vulnerability of our human existence, and to touch that for a moment, and to feel that, and to feel all that one feels as you approach the doorstep of this kind of truth, and to have our illusions pulled down. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening for me. That's what's happening for all of us. I remember when this crisis first started, maybe you did too, you had this sense of, well, it's far away. Well, it's in a different country. Well, it's in a different state. Well, it's in a different region of the US. Well, it's in a different part of the state. Well, it's in a different county than the one I live in. Well, it's in a different street in the county that I don't visit, and on and on and on it goes. Our illusions of having control and power and distance from our own vulnerability just get stripped away. And I have to be honest, that brings fear and anxiety and uncertainty and worry, if we're honest about that. He's got one more paragraph. I know typically at C3 we do a reading and there's not a bunch of commentary, but I guess I can't help it. So here's the final part of the reading here. The only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability. The only choice we have as we mature is how to inhabit our vulnerability, which again he says is the fundamental state of being human. The only choice we have as we mature, and God, do we need to mature, is how we inhabit our vulnerability, how we become larger and more courageous and more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance. How we become larger and more courageous and more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance. Our choice is to inhabit vulnerability as generous citizens of loss, robustly and fully. Or, he's about to provide an alternative here, or conversely, as misers and complainers, reluctant and fearful, always at the gates of existence, but never bravely and completely attempting to enter, never wanting to risk ourselves, never walking fully through the door. And that's how David Whyte ends these reflections on vulnerability, again from a book called Consolations, the solace, nourishment, and underlying meaning of everyday words. I wanted to begin with hearing from David Whyte and reflecting on vulnerability I wanted to begin there because if you're at all paying attention to the internal landscape and to the external world, you and I are being brought to the gates, what he calls the gates of existence, even. And that threshold of the truth of our own vulnerability and our own vulnerabilities, our inability to seal off the world. And the invitation that I think I hear in David Whyte is to walk with courage toward those gates, and to open our hearts toward the gates of uncertainty, and to see what happens. And I think in doing so, to walk with that kind of courage toward our own vulnerabilities, toward the impermanence of life. I mean, think about Buddhism 101, the first tenet, that everything is impermanent. And there are times when I know that intellectually, like I like to quote that. I've said it before to all of you many times, everything is impermanent. And there are times when that feels like an idea. And there are other moments when you can feel the contours of the reality of such a thing, the reality of our own impermanence. And I think David Whyte is saying to be a maturing adult, and I might add to be an elder, and God, we need elders right now, is to walk with courage through the gates of our own vulnerability, which brings more compassion and love and openness, and has the capacity not to deny fear, but to walk toward fear and see what else is just beneath the surface. The other thing I've been thinking a bit about, besides this essay, is just the word courage. After all, that's what he uses in here. Courage comes from a French word meaning heart. And I think as a culture we have kind of a Hollywood version of courage in our minds, as if courage is climbing a hill in battle, or conquering something, or pushing through your fears. And I'm sure there are dimensions of courage to which that fits, but I think more importantly, just to hear the root word of courage is rooted in the French word for heart, which is in the essay that I just read on vulnerability. To have heart, to have courage, and to sink into your amazing and beautiful and vulnerable heart sense of things, a heartfelt sense of things, is to tap into courage. And God, we need heart right now. I too have engaged in a fair amount of blame and fear in the last few days. I remember one time I was listening to the Trump administration say something, and I thought, how idiotic that they're blaming someone or something. And I all of a sudden I could see the irony of I'm blaming them for blaming. And we almost can't help it. I think part of what happens in times of vulnerability is that our fight and freeze parts of our human makeup come to the surface. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's a reason why all of us, every one of us, without exception, I don't care how enlightened you think you are, have fight, flight, and freeze. It's in our limbic system. It's it's natural, it's normal, it's how we survived. It's how any of us got here. I mean, in the history of being human, I mean, I'm a historian, I guess, in a way. At least that's my formal training. And history is about pandemics. Recorded history is often about pandemics and wars. And those are the things that get etched down in the history books and in Akkadian tablets. Not to mention a few other things, but I don't know, there's something about the 21st century where we feel kind of removed from that. Maybe not so much from war, because we're always making and creating new wars, but pandemics, sweeping pandemics that wipe out hundreds, thousands of people. There's a sense, I think, as part of our modern illusion that we're beyond all that we conquered that. And that too is proved to be an illusion. And the moment that sort of breaks in to our consciousness, fight, flight, and freeze happens. And I want to tell you something directly. If that's happening for you, that is normal. You don't have to berate yourself for your own survival strategies that got us here as a species. However, as necessary and as needed as the fight, flight, freeze, evolutionary limbic response is, however much that's needed and necessary, that's not all there is to being a human being. And the truth, I think, beneath the truth of the survival mechanisms is we also got here as a species because of cooperation, because of assistance, because of our own capacities to break out of our own, to use fancy contemporary language, egoic consciousness, me and mine, into a sense of we. That's also what got us here. And we need more of that. And I think the path toward cooperation and compassion and community care, I don't know, I was really touched by the immediacy with which people got together and said, oh, some students aren't going to be able to eat lunch or breakfast, for that matter, because the schools are closed. How quickly can we get meals available to students? See, that's courage. That's right here. That's the heart. That's the heart saying, yes, flight, fight, freeze is a reality, and there's more. And there's more to being a human being. So I guess I feel like I'm being called toward a more heartfelt way of being during this time. And we're going to need one another. We're going to need cooperation and encouragement and support. And I hope this podcast, or whatever this is, Facebook Live, can be a tiny seed of that we're more connected than we think. And like I said at the beginning, in case you missed the beginning, we're getting together as a board this week, and where we want to discuss creative ways to stay connected in the coming weeks for the foreseeable future. I mean, what a strange reality that we can't even see the end of such a thing. Talk about taking us to the knees and bringing us again into the fundamental reality of our own vulnerability, the fundamental reality of our own existence. We can't even plan for the future very well because we don't know what it will unfold and entail. And so I want to live in a more heartfelt way, which is also to live in a way that opens us up to heartbreak. You can't live with your heart on your sleeve without it getting broken. And I think is it Camus that says, I want to live to the point of tears. What a line. I want to live to the point of tears. And I think living with heart, living with courage, living with vulnerability, living with compassion, living with an openness to one's own needs and to the needs of others takes us to the point of tears, takes us to the point of heartbreak. And it's a heartbreaking time. Besides all the things that we bitch and complain and moan about incompetencies, and as if governments were ever very competent, incompetencies and inconsistencies and half-truths, and as much as we complain about all that stuff, and I'm not even saying it's wrong to offer critique, beneath all that are hurting human beings and hurting communities. And I have to say something that is obvious about C3, but I want to say it, and I want to say it as clearly as I can. We have a pretty vulnerable population. Many core, committed people that make up C3 are older, and some of you have underlying health concerns, and we need to say that out loud. And in some respects, we need to take extra measures here in the next few weeks and months, perhaps, to do whatever we can to protect and encourage and support one another. So I know that probably goes without saying, but it's also worth saying. And I'm even thinking about our community newsletter that comes out every week, which you should definitely read. I know many of you, it comes in your inbox and you don't read it. But just, I imagine in the coming weeks, the community concerns of our own people will grow, and we'll want to be paying attention and ask, how can we live in a heart felt and heartful way toward our neighbors and friends? So check in on one another. And maybe I want to say just a few more things that are on the personal side for me. I went to the store, as probably many of you went to the store. I went to Aldi, and part of me was saying, well, it's the weekend and that's when I do my shopping, and I'm just doing my ordinary shopping. I'm not freaking out like everybody else. I'm just gonna go and get do my normal grocery run, plus a few other things. And the other part of me was saying, get to the store as fast as possible and try to grab whatever's on the shelves, because what the hell is going on? So I had this dual conflicting feeling walking in there. And one of the things on my list was potatoes and onions, and they were completely gone. And I remember standing there sort of looking at these empty boxes, and part of me was saying, well, maybe they'll be in tomorrow. Another part of me is saying, what's happening? And I could feel that sense of fear even, and scarcity sort of starting to emerge, as if I'm so enlightened that I can be above all that. But in truth, yeah, I could feel that sense of scarcity, and I hadn't felt that in a long time. And I hadn't felt it directly. And I guess part of me was trying to push that away, like that kind of freaking out and hoarding, that other people do that, not me. I'm not. But in truth, no, these are pretty natural feelings. And I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. If you went to the store, you probably experienced something like that. And I was at the store with my daughter, my 19-year-old daughter, and we were coming out of the store, and I was pushing the cart, and because at Aldi you have to return the carts, so I'm pushing the cart, and all of a sudden I had a kind of a flashback that I hadn't had, that I don't think I've experienced since. And I remembered what it was like living in Israel. So I lived in Israel for a few years, and there were two things that happened there that put the entire community on edge. The first was the Iraq War. So I was living there when the Iraq War started, and they were beginning to encourage people not to move around, and to stay put, and to make sure they sealed their windows for a potential chemical weapon, because they were afraid Iraq would send chemical weapons to Israel through Scud missiles, as they attempted to do before, or threatened to do. Have your windows sealed up, have food and water, and you had to go to the mall of all places. God, this is crazy. You had to go to the mall to pick up your army-issued gas mask. I had to go there to the mall with my passport, show them my passport with my daughter and my wife, and pick up our army-issued gas masks. That was a feeling of I don't know what the world is really like. And that you could feel it as a kind of energetic mood in the culture. And Israelis are really tough people, and Palestinians are really tough people. And they're used to conflicts. They're used to uncertainties. But even in such a tough culture, you could see the sense of fear, anxiety about the future as people were just going to the grocery store and going about their business. And I all of a sudden could feel that in the parking lot in Aldi, when people are kind of pushing their carts a little faster than normal, and loading their cars a little faster than normal. You could feel that cultural sense, and it's contagious in a way. And I'm here, I guess I'm just acknowledging that. That's what was happening for me, this feeling of scarcity and uncertainty and fear, and survival. And again, I want to say, this is normal, and it's not all that it means to be a human being. And just to feel the insecurity of daily life and money and making money. As you know, I work at C3, and the other part of what I do, I lead trips to Israel, and I do retreats and programs, all of which are completely dependent on airplanes and travel. The entire tourist industry, just like overnight, in other words, part of how I've made a living for the last 17 years just can evaporate, and evaporated in just a matter of days. And just feeling the anxiety of that, like, again, the world is not what I thought it was. My own illusions about the certainties of how life is and how it goes suddenly get, the curtain gets pulled back. And we're brought back to some of those basic human needs, like food and shelter and water, and I guess toilet paper. Part of me with this whole toilet paper thing thinks, oh, how ridiculous, you can't even think creatively if you run out of toilet paper. Need I say more? But another part of me thinks, am I doing something wrong? Should I be getting toilet paper? Am I missing something that other people apparently see? Is there something that they know that I don't? That's how this, the contagion of scarcity and fear can take off kind of culturally and spin. And I just want to remind you this morning, those are real things. Those are real feelings and real thoughts. And that's not all that it means to be a human being. You can also walk courageously toward the inevitability of your fundamental essence, which is, according to David White, vulnerability. Other feelings that have been surfacing, just like a general sense of sadness. And like, it's sad. It's sad that this is happening in the world, and that nobody is exempt, rich and poor. And there's an added element of sadness that our older population who we need as elders now more than ever are even more vulnerable to this disease. And I don't know, that just brings a certain amount of sadness, and I think it's important to feel that and get close to that. And also, I guess, I'm just listing my feelings at this point, and I'll say why when I'm done, in case you think this is a chance for me to just, hey, here's a bunch of things I've been feeling. And I've also felt a fair amount of anger, anger at our healthcare system, and its vulnerabilities, and it's in the injustices of our own healthcare system. I felt a great deal of anger and fear around that, and a great deal of anger toward our government. And really, like, I felt, maybe you felt it too, not just this administration, but any administrations for not having the insight to plan for such a thing, and to do everything it can to protect its own citizens. Yeah, I felt some anger about that. Anger that they don't know what they're doing, and how to do what's worth doing. And also angry at myself that I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't have solutions, and maybe no one does. And again, that's taking us a little closer to the reality of being a human being, which is our egoic sense of safety and security is an illusion. And that's humbling. And maybe in the wake of this, and even in the present moment of this, we can begin to look more honestly at what does it mean to live in this world and in this global society, and how can we turn more careful, thoughtful, rational, and heartfelt attention to the vulnerabilities of our own existence. And that's not to, and this, it's like COVID-19 just exposes our vulnerabilities and our global connectedness. And I'm even thinking of things like climate change and the coming impending vulnerabilities around the world of our changing environment. And I guess part of me hopes that it's a wake-up call. I want to treat it as a wake-up call, just for the ways in which I'm offering my attention to the realities of the 21st century. But I hope that happens on a much bigger scale than just personally. Now, I wanted to just list, in a way, some of my own feelings, and to encourage you to pay attention and to let surface the mixed bag of your own feelings. It's funny because a lot of my work out in the wild world, when I lead retreats and programs, and when I work one-on-one with people, a lot of it is just getting in touch with some of the most basic elements of being a human. What am I thinking? Like the 4 windows of knowing, which I talked about last year, the thinking self, and the feeling self, and the sensing self, and the imaginative self. That's the full faceted reality of being human. And what happens, and I'm going to use a word here, and I don't mean it clinically, I mean it actually in its direct definition. What happens when we push down or depress our feelings? We become depressed. We grow smaller. And really, psychological health 101 is not pressing down and allowing the unsavory elements of our own humanness to surface. Our own angers, our fears, our anxieties, our worries, our complaints, our losses, and our hopes and longings, all of that. I think needs space to come out and come up. Otherwise, if we try to keep them at bay through the powers of our own sort of egoic illusions, we actually sink into a kind of depression. That's actually what the word refers to. And so I guess I want to say it's okay to feel what we feel, and also to tell ourselves something like, and that's not all we are. Just like I've been saying about the heart. And there's more to being a human being. I think what happens, and maybe these are my final thoughts. I think what happens in time periods of cultural anxiety and uncertainty is that we have an opportunity to have our own values be clarified, to go through a sieve or a winnowing fan or fork, or a screen, a net. You come up with an image, a rubric, if you want to use an academic term, through which something of our own values can begin to be honed and clarified. We might begin with feelings of fear, anxiety, scarcity, and hoarding, but to let those surface, and to also check in with the heart. And what else am I feeling? I'm feeling a sense of loss. I'm feeling a sense of pain, and I'm hurting. And why is that? It's because I love my life, and I love my relatives, and I love my neighbors, really. And I love the people in my community. And maybe even it's possible to even love my enemies, as Jesus sort of like challenges us with love your neighbor as yourself. That actually, yes, I'm feeling these things, but it's because I love life, and I love human beings, and I don't want to suffer, and I don't want other people to suffer, and I don't want to cause undue suffering in the world. In fact, I want to do everything I can to limit my own suffering and the suffering of others. That's a clarification of values. And I think in times of crisis, that's the great invitation. How can our own values lead us to questions of what we really care about? And I don't know if you felt that this week, but like material possessions, like other than the basic necessities, have felt very paper thin. Stuff that, I got to be honest, last week, I have an iPhone, whatever this is, iPhone 8, I think. Thinking, man, I'm really behind. They're already on to the 11, and soon the 12 is going to come out. And if I don't get the new iPhone, whatever, I'm going to be left behind. And all of a sudden, it's like in times like this, I don't even care at all. Nothing about me cares about the new what am I going to? I need a better camera to take better Instagram pictures of myself. Doing what? That's when clarification of values. That's that winnowing fan, sifting out the what's really non-essential and paper thin and kind of meaningless from what's actually important. And I guess I hope to let that happen to me, and I'm trying to encourage you to let the sifting of values happen. What do you really love? What do we really love? How might we love? What do we really care about? How might we care about it? How might we offer ourselves to caring with the biggest kind of heart we can for ourselves and for our friends and for our relatives and for our neighbors? I think that's what's called for in this really time of unprecedented crisis. So that's what I have for you today. And I want to thank you. I think 64 people, 64 people are presently watching. And and by the way, I want to encourage you, because I'm about to end this, to, once it's finished, to share this with your friends, your Facebook friends, I guess, because I want as many people in our community and the broader community, the online community, just to be in interaction with one another like this, in this way. to hear words from David White and from me and from others, to have even an online sense of connection that we are in this together. So I want to encourage you to share this video with friends. And by the way, you don't actually need Facebook to watch it. You can just take the link if you want to email it to someone, and all I have to do is click on it and they can watch it. They don't need a Facebook account. I want to just look through here, just looking at some of your comments here, which are quite beautiful. Just sort of responding to what I'm saying and to one another. Yeah, keep this going. I imagine, like I said at the beginning, we're having a board meeting this week about the future of C3 for the next few weeks or month or so. And I can guarantee we'll be doing something like this next Sunday at 10 a.m., Facebook Live, and perhaps providing other resources and opportunities for us to stay connected. So I just want to thank you so much for joining me this morning, and I'm wishing you all the very best. I'm wishing you health and well-being and love and heart and courage as you step through that gate of our own collective vulnerabilities with the biggest heart we can. So thank you. I wish you well. I love you all. And I'll see you soon, even if it's over the internet. What a world we live in.